My husband cheated with my sister when I couldn't conceive, now I'm pregnant, and he's furious I still want a divorce. Growing up, my older sister, Tessa, was more than just family, she was my closest friend and the one person I could always count on. I shared everything with her, knowing she would always listen. From the time I could walk and talk, she was my go-to for every question, every worry. Our parents encouraged a strong bond between us, and it felt natural to lean on her. In those early years, Tessa had a way of making everything feel safe. She was warm, endlessly patient, and always knew just the right thing to say when I needed comfort. We spent hours lost in our own little world, building forts in our bedroom, playing with Barbie dolls, creating stories out of thin air. One of my favorite memories is how she'd read to me every night before we fell asleep, her voice making even the simplest stories come alive. When I started school, it was rough, I cried constantly, begging my parents not to leave me behind. But Tessa, who was a few years ahead of me, promised to look out for me, and she kept that promise. Every lunchtime, she'd check in, making sure I was okay. Just knowing she was nearby made those early school days a little less terrifying. After school, she was the one helping me with homework since our parents worked late. Whether it was struggling through math problems or writing stories for English class, she never lost patience with me. She had this incredible way of making me feel capable, like I could figure things out if I just kept trying. Looking back, I can see how much responsibility she carried. In a way, she was forced into the role of a second parent, something neither of us truly understood at the time. If I ever had a problem, I didn't run to Mom, I ran straight to Tessa, because she always knew what to do. But while I leaned on her, I never realized just how much she was struggling. I was too young to see it, but Tessa had no one to lean on herself. Our parents did their best, working long hours to provide for us, making sure we had everything we needed, even if it stretched them thin. And though they tried their hardest, I think Tessa felt overlooked. She needed more than just food on the table and a roof over her head, she needed their attention, their reassurance, their love. I wish, more than anything, they had seen that. There's one memory I can't forget, walking into her room and catching her in the middle of cutting herself. The way she recoiled in horror when she saw me, the way I instinctively pretended not to notice. I didn't ask her about it, didn't press, because at the time, I was too young to understand what it meant. I chalked it up to some weird thing rebellious teenagers did, not realizing the weight behind it. By the time Tessa was close to graduating high school, things had spiraled out of control. She was deep into drugs, barely scraping by in her classes. The school principal called home constantly, sometimes because Tessa had gotten into a fight, other times because she'd mouthed off to a teacher. Our dad, the stricter of our parents, would come home furious, lecturing her for hours, yelling, even going so far as to take her bedroom door off its hinges as punishment. But Tessa never backed down. She'd scream right back, telling him how much she hated school, how stupid she thought everyone was. Mom tried to mediate, to soothe things over, but it never worked. The fights got louder, more frequent, filling our home with a tension you could practically feel in the air. I would shut myself in my room, pressing my hands over my ears, wishing it would all just stop. And then, one night, she ran away. She left a letter on the dining table, filled with venom, insults aimed at our parents, threats telling them to stay out of her life. She was leaving to start fresh with her boyfriend, a guy none of us trusted. I'll never forget the way Mom broke down, sobbing as she clutched that letter like it was the last piece of Tessa she had left. Dad, pale and shaking, called 911, his voice uneven as he explained the situation. Tessa was still a minor, still legally under their care, and with her drug use, none of us believed she was in the right state of mind. The authorities took it seriously, but the waiting, those endless hours of not knowing where she was unbearable. When they finally found her, she was holed up in a dingy motel with that boyfriend of hers, a guy with ties to some kind of drug operation. He was arrested on the spot. Tessa, on the other hand, insisted she didn't know anything about his criminal activities, so they let her come home. I hoped this would be a wake-up call for her, that maybe she'd finally realize how much we loved her, how scared we had been. I wanted to throw my arms around her, tell her I was glad she was home. But she wasn't grateful. She wasn't relieved. Instead, she lashed out, screaming at our parents for interfering, for getting her boyfriend locked up. Her face was twisted with rage, her words cutting deep. Her eyes, wild, unrecognizable, told me she wasn't really there, not entirely. It was as if the drugs had hollowed her out, leaving someone I barely knew. I still remember the way Dad's voice wavered, steady yet full of emotion as he told her, "Tessa, we love you, but we can't keep living like this. You need help." Mom, standing beside him, nodded through her tears, gripping his arm for strength. Tessa exploded. "Help? You think I need help?" she shouted, arms flailing. "You're the ones who need help. I'm not your prisoner, you can't control me. That's when they told her rehab was already arranged. She needed treatment, and as her legal guardians, they had the final say. The second those words left their mouths, Tessa lost it completely. She screamed louder, throwing anything within reach, glasses, books, whatever she could get her hands on. She didn't care if it hit us, didn't care if it hurt. Her rage was a storm, and we were caught in the middle of it. Then came the words that froze all of us in place. "If you send me there, I'll kill myself." Even then, our parents stood firm. Mom, tears streaking her face, told her, "We're responsible for you until you're old enough to make your own decisions. And we're not going to stand by and watch you destroy yourself." And just like that, everything changed. That night, Dad had no choice but to lock Tessa in her room. She was too out of control, breaking things, screaming, threatening to hurt herself. It was devastating to watch her unravel like that, to see firsthand what drugs had done to my sister. I could hear her sobbing, then screaming, then going completely silent. I lay in my own bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling helpless. The next few days passed in a blur. Mom and Dad worked tirelessly to get her admitted to a rehab center, buried in paperwork, making endless calls, trying to ensure she got the help she needed. Meanwhile, Tessa remained volatile. One moment she was seething with anger, the next she was crying uncontrollably. It was like watching a storm rage inside her, never knowing when the next outburst would come. The morning she left for rehab was one of the hardest days of my life. She stood by the front door, flanked by our parents, her face twisted in a mix of fury and helplessness. I wanted to hug her, to tell her I still loved her no matter what. But when I ran up to her, she shoved me to the ground and spat at me. I just sat there, stunned, my heart pounding. Tessa had never directed that kind of anger at me before. Sure, she had been distant, cruel even, but this was different. Mom knelt beside me immediately, brushing the hair out of my face. "She's suffering," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't hold this against her." I nodded, but deep down, something inside me had cracked. Still, I held on to hope. Every day, I prayed that rehab would bring my sister back to us. That the kind, protective Tessa I had grown up with would return. When she finally came home 2 months later, she looked healthier, her face was no longer gaunt, and she had a little color in her cheeks again. Seeing her standing there at the rehab center, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. Mom cried as she hugged her, whispering how much she had missed her. Dad placed a firm but reassuring hand on her shoulder. I had made her a card, writing down everything I had wanted to say, how much I missed her, how glad I was that she was home. I stood there, waiting for my turn, but when I reached out to hug her, she brushed right past me like I wasn't even there. I tried not to take it personally. Maybe she was just overwhelmed. On the way home, Mom kept trying to make her feel welcome, telling her how we had kept her room exactly as she liked it. Dad had bought her favorite candies and cookies. I held my card in my hands, waiting for her to notice. But she never did. She never even glanced at it. At first, I thought she just needed time to adjust. She had been through a lot, and maybe she wasn't ready to talk. But as the days went by, it became clear that something had changed, something deeper, something darker. Tessa avoided me completely. If I walked into the kitchen, she would walk out. If I sat on the couch, she would move to another chair. Whenever I tried to start a conversation, she would shut me down before I could even get a full sentence out. "What do you want?" she snapped one evening, her eyes full of contempt. "Can't you just leave me alone?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. I gave her space, hoping she would come around, but things only got worse. One night, when our parents weren't home, I decided to try again. Maybe, without them around, she would open up to me like she used to. I knocked on her bedroom door. "Tessa? Can I come in? I just want to talk." "Go away," she screamed from the other side. "I don't ever want to see your stupid face." I stood there, my hand still resting against the door, stunned. I didn't understand. What had I done? Why did she hate me so much? Our parents noticed, too. They tried to get through to her, tried to mediate, but it only made things worse. She didn't just yell at them, she told them she wished they had never had another child. That she wished Mom had aborted me. Hearing that shattered something inside me. Tessa had been my hero. The person I had idolized my entire childhood. And now she was saying she wished I had never existed. Not in the heat of an argument, not in a moment of rage, she meant it. Family dinners became unbearable. Where we once laughed and talked freely, now there was only tension. Tessa would glare at me across the table, rolling her eyes if I spoke. If I tried to tell Mom and Dad about my day, she would cut in with cruel remarks, calling me a loser, a nerd, saying I didn't deserve to have friends. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself she was just hurting. But it wore me down. I started eating less, speaking less, avoiding the table whenever I could. Then, one night, it escalated to something far worse. I have a severe peanut allergy, everyone in my family knows this. Mom and Dad are careful not to keep anything with peanuts in the house. One evening, Tessa offered to make dinner. It was chicken salad, and I didn't think much of it. I sat down with my family and took a few bites. At first, everything seemed fine. Then, something felt off. My throat started feeling scratchy. A sense of unease crept over me, and before I could fully process it, Mom let out a sudden gasp. She was staring at her plate, her face going pale. "Tessa," she said sharply. "Did you put peanuts in this?" Tessa didn't even flinch. "Yeah," she said, her voice casual. "I thought it'd be crunchier that way." By the time I realized what was happening, my throat was nearly closed. Panic set in as my breaths became shallow and labored. I clawed at my neck, desperate for air, while my mother shot up from her chair and rushed to my side. "Tessa, how could you?" she screamed, her voice a mix of terror and fury. Tessa just stood there, arms crossed, looking bored. "I don't think it's a big deal," she muttered. "She's probably pretending." I could barely register her words, I was too busy gasping, my vision darkening around the edges. Dad sprang into action, running to the kitchen and yanking open a drawer. He grabbed my EpiPen and, without hesitation, administered the injection. The sharp stab of the needle was nothing compared to the suffocating dread that had gripped me moments before. Meanwhile, Mom had already dialed 911, her voice shaking as she frantically explained the situation to the dispatcher. Every second felt like an eternity as we waited for the ambulance. My body felt weak, drained, like I was slipping in and out of awareness. The paramedics arrived in what felt like both an instant and a lifetime. They strapped me onto a stretcher, their voices calm and professional, but their eyes filled with urgency. The blaring sirens, the flashing red lights, it was all a blur. As I was rushed to the hospital, I couldn't stop thinking about the betrayal that had just occurred. My sister, the person who once looked out for me, had knowingly put my life in danger. That night in the hospital was one of the worst of my life. I lay in the hospital bed, exhausted and shaken, with an oxygen mask over my face. My parents sat by my side, their faces etched with worry. Mom squeezed my hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "We're so sorry, honey," she whispered. "We'll make sure this never happens again." Dad's expression was grim. "Tessa will have to answer for what she did. We won't let this slide." I don't remember exactly how they punished her, but whatever it was, it didn't feel like enough. The damage was done. My trust in Tessa was shattered. And more than that, I no longer felt safe in my own home. After that incident, I withdrew. I spent most of my time in my room, avoiding Tessa as much as possible. Our parents tried to get her into therapy, hoping it would help. But Tessa was manipulative. She could twist words like no one else, and soon enough, even the therapists were convinced she was just a troubled young woman who had made a careless mistake. They downplayed what had happened, telling my parents it wasn't as serious as they were making it out to be. Tessa, of course, used that to her advantage. She never apologized. Never showed an ounce of remorse. The fear of eating in my own house consumed me. I became paranoid about every meal, every snack, every drink. I started skipping meals altogether, and before long, the hunger and stress started taking a toll on my health. Mom, seeing how much I was struggling, came up with a solution. She bought me a small refrigerator for my room, one that locked. She encouraged me to keep my own snacks in there, assuring me that no one, not even Tessa, would be able to tamper with my food. It was a game changer. Having that fridge gave me a sense of control, a way to protect myself. For the first time in months, I could eat without second-guessing every bite. Without Mom's intervention, I might have fallen into an eating disorder out of sheer fear. By the time I graduated high school and left for college, it felt like I was escaping a war zone. Being away from Tessa was like breathing fresh air for the first time. I no longer had to constantly look over my shoulder, no longer had to brace myself for cruel words or hidden dangers. College gave me freedom, real freedom, and I embraced it wholeheartedly. I threw myself into my studies, met new people, and, for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living. It was during this time that I met my husband, Mitchell. We started as friends, bonding over our shared love for anime. Our friendship was natural, effortless. He was one of the first people who made me feel truly seen. We would spend hours discussing our favorite series, debating characters and plot twists, and supporting each other through the stress of college life. Over time, our bond deepened, and friendship turned into love. Mitchell was everything I had never realized I needed: kind, patient, understanding. He never once made me feel small or unimportant. When we got married, I wanted nothing more than a beautiful, peaceful day surrounded by loved ones. But, of course, Tessa had other plans. Our parents convinced me to invite her, swearing that she had changed. Unlike me, Tessa had never gone to college. She spent years living off our parents, working only a part-time job as a cashier. Whenever I visited home during breaks, she would find new reasons to pick fights with me, always looking for a way to bring me down. Still, I hoped, naively, that she would behave at my wedding. She didn't. She showed up in a white dress. At first, I thought I was imagining things, that maybe it was some pale shade of pink or beige. But no. It was white. Bright, unmistakable white. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't ignorance. It was a calculated move to steal attention from me, to ruin my moment. My husband's family was stunned. My friends exchanged uneasy glances. I felt the heat rise to my face, my hands trembling at my sides. But before I could say anything, Dad stepped in. Without hesitation, he grabbed Tessa by the arm and led her toward the exit. She protested, of course, but he didn't budge. He warned her that if she stayed and continued her nonsense, she wouldn't just be leaving the wedding, she'd be leaving their house for good. Tessa stormed out, furious, but the moment she was gone, the tension lifted. The rest of the day went smoothly, and despite that hiccup, my wedding was beautiful. Afterward, Dad and Mom apologized for ever convincing me to invite her in the first place. That was the last time I saw Tessa in person. Now, Mitchell and I have been married for 3 years. We're happy. We've built a life together, with stable jobs and a house of our own. At first, our marriage was filled with romance, date nights, and an intimate connection that made me feel whole. But then, a new challenge emerged. We couldn't conceive. Mitchell and I always dreamed of having children. It was something we both deeply wanted, so when months passed without a pregnancy, we sought every medical test available to figure out what was wrong. But time and time again, the doctors gave us the same answer: there was no clear reason. Everything seemed normal. We were simply told to keep trying. I believed in trusting the universe, in the idea that things happen when they're meant to. But Mitchell was different. He was methodical, analytical, he needed control over every aspect of our lives. The uncertainty of our situation drove him into an obsession. He spent hours researching potential causes and solutions, reading every article and medical journal he could find. Soon, his need for control turned into a full-blown fixation. Every month, it was something new. A different diet. A new supplement. A strict schedule for everything, from when we ate to when we slept to when we were intimate. At first, I went along with it, understanding his desperation. But over time, the pressure became suffocating. I felt like I was no longer a person, just a project he was trying to fix. Whenever I tried to express how overwhelmed I felt, he would snap. "You're not trying hard enough," he would yell. My mother never had any issues getting pregnant. She had 3 kids without even thinking about it. His words cut deep, making me feel like a failure. No matter what I did, it was never enough. Our marriage, once filled with love and laughter, started crumbling under the weight of his obsession. We drifted further apart, and then Mitchell betrayed me in the worst way possible. Twice. On 2 separate occasions, I caught him cheating with women he had met at bars. Both times, he begged for forgiveness. He claimed he loved me, that he wanted nothing more than to start a family with me. But after a few days, his remorse would fade, and the gaslighting would begin. "You pushed me to this," he would say coldly. "You made me feel unwanted." I saw the pattern. I saw how he twisted reality to make me question myself. But the truth was clear: he wasn't the man I had fallen in love with anymore. And I couldn't keep living like this, caught in a cycle of heartbreak and false hope. Last week, I finally confided in my best friend about everything. For so long, I had been too ashamed to admit the truth. But when I did, she listened, really listened, without judgment. She reminded me that my feelings were valid. That I wasn't crazy. That I deserved better. That night, I made up my mind. I was going to sit down with Mitchell and tell him I was done. But he never came home. I called him. Over and over again. My calls went straight to voicemail. My frustration boiled over. I knew exactly where he was, the bar he frequented. I grabbed my keys and drove there, expecting to catch him flirting with another random woman. But nothing could have prepared me for what I actually saw. Mitchell was sitting in a corner booth, laughing, leaning in close. His hands touched hers. And then, he kissed her. Tessa. My own sister. I felt my entire world shatter. I stood there frozen, unable to breathe, unable to process the betrayal unfolding right in front of me. Then, almost on autopilot, I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures. Proof. Not that I needed it, what I saw with my own eyes would be burned into my memory forever. I didn't confront them. I didn't cause a scene. Instead, I turned around, walked back to my car, and cried the entire way home. When I got there, I didn't even hesitate. I packed my bags and left. I drove straight to my parents' house, and the moment I stepped inside, I collapsed into my mother's arms. Between sobs, I told them everything: how Mitchell had cheated before, how I had planned to leave him, and how I had just found him with Tessa. My parents were in complete disbelief. Tessa had always been selfish, but this? This was a new level of cruelty. Fortunately, I had the pictures to prove it. My dad was livid. He grabbed his phone, dialed Tessa, and barked into the receiver. "Get home. Now." She must have sensed what was coming because she didn't come alone. She had the audacity to bring Mitchell with her. What followed was chaos. Dad didn't waste time. He grabbed Tessa's belongings and threw them outside, one by one, while Mitchell and Tessa desperately tried to explain themselves. "We're better suited for each other," Tessa pleaded. "You guys just need to accept that." "Yeah," Mitchell added, his voice smooth, as if he actually believed his own nonsense. "You're overreacting. You should just give us a chance." Mom lost it. She physically pushed them both out the door, her voice shaking with rage. "You are not welcome here, Tessa. Ever again." And just like that, Tessa was disowned. Since then, Mitchell has been blowing up my phone with calls and messages. He claims I overreacted. He says Tessa is devastated about being kicked out and that I was wrong to involve our parents before talking to them first. But you know what? I don't regret a single thing. Update 1. Dad and a few of his friends helped me pack up all my things and move them to my parents' house. Being back in my childhood home feels surreal, but at least I feel safe here. Meanwhile, Tessa has moved in with Mitchell. She's been trying to reach out to our parents, but they've made it clear they're done with her. According to Mitchell, he and Tessa accidentally ran into each other months ago at a bar. He claims she understood his pain and that their connection was natural. It's laughable, really. Mitchell knew exactly what Tessa had put me through. He saw firsthand how she tried to ruin our wedding. And yet, he still chose her. That tells me everything I need to know. Looking back, I doubt Mitchell put much thought into his affair with Tessa. At the end of the day, he's just a sleazy, impulsive man who never truly considered the consequences of his actions. As for Tessa, she's always harbored resentment toward me. Maybe she saw pursuing my husband as some twisted way to assert power over me. Perhaps the thrill of sneaking around, of betraying me so completely, was even exciting for them. It makes me sick to think about it, but honestly, I'm done trying to figure them out. I have bigger things to focus on now. This week, I'll be meeting with a divorce lawyer to finally move forward with ending my marriage. Update 2. It's been a month since my last update, and I have some important news, shocking news, actually. I recently found out that I'm pregnant. This is something I've wanted for so long, something I once dreamed about endlessly. But now that it's actually happening, I can't help but wish the circumstances were different. Instead of feeling joy, all I feel is uncertainty and fear. My parents, though supportive, have strongly discouraged me from keeping the baby. They worry that it will forever tie me to Mitchell, and they don't want me to go through any more pain because of him. And honestly, I don't know if I can handle that either. I need to think carefully about my options. There's so much to process, and I don't want to make a decision I'll regret. I decided to inform Mitchell about the pregnancy, though I wasn't expecting much from him. His immediate response? He wanted to call off the divorce. "Let's do marriage counseling," he suggested, suddenly full of concern. "I'll break up with Tessa right now." I was so taken aback by his sudden change of heart that I actually laughed. The audacity of this man. After everything he put me through, he actually thought I'd consider taking him back just because I was pregnant? I shut that idea down immediately. I told him, point blank, that even if I decided to have this child, our relationship would be strictly about co-parenting, nothing more. There was no saving our marriage. Mitchell didn't take it well. He snapped. "If you had gotten pregnant sooner, I would have chosen you over Tessa," he shouted over the phone. His words left me disgusted. It was like he saw me and my potential child as nothing more than a game he could win. That one sentence made me regret even telling him. It only confirmed what I already knew: Mitchell wasn't capable of love, at least not the kind that's real and unconditional. I'll update again once I've made my final decision, but one thing is absolutely certain: I'm getting divorced from that loser, no matter what. Update 3. Hey, everyone. I have some major updates. First, I'm officially divorced from my ex-husband. As part of the settlement, Mitchell had to pay me a substantial amount in alimony, which allowed me to secure a new place for myself. I'm beyond grateful for that, but more importantly, I feel free. My job is going well, and my parents and friends have been my rock throughout all of this. Their support means everything to me, and I don't know where I'd be without them. Second, I want to address something deeply personal. I did not go through with the pregnancy. I know not everyone will agree with my decision, and that's okay. But after everything that happened, I wasn't in the right headspace to bring a child into this world. I had serious doubts about whether I could provide them with the life they deserved, and I didn't want them to suffer because of my circumstances. It was one of the hardest choices I've ever had to make. It devastated me. But deep down, I believe it was the best decision for both myself and the child. And finally, Mitchell and Tessa? They're over. Shortly after the divorce was finalized, they had a huge fight, and Mitchell kicked Tessa out in the middle of the night. She tried to go back to our parents, but they refused to take her in. When my dad threatened to call the police if she didn't leave, she finally got the message. From what I've heard through mutual friends, Tessa is now couchsurfing and trying to save money. Maybe this will be her wake-up call. Maybe she'll finally grow up and learn from her mistakes. Or maybe she won't. Either way, it's no longer my problem. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have control over my own life again. And that's a feeling I plan to hold on to.